Hello and welcome back, or welcome. Maybe it's your first time. Doubtful. Hopefully, you've been with us for a while. Either way, welcome to the Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Daniel A. Franz. Dr. Dan. It's so much easier to say with my good friend. I'm not even going to try for the full. No, my good friend, Rabbi Doctor, or is it Dr. Rabbi Baruch B. HaLevi? B. How you doing, my brother?
I'm doing well, man. You're looking sharp. You're looking dapper today. I feel like we got a memo, like to spice it up, both of us.
I think so, man. It's curious how we both have patterns today. Neither one of us going with the plain black or white shirt. It must be a spicy day for both of us.
All I can say is, for those of you not watching on YouTube, it's your loss. It's just
Your loss.
all right. So we're jumping in today, and what are we rolling with, my brother?
I heard, I've seen that you put together a pretty solid article about what was an outstanding NCAA championship football game this previous week, where my Michigan Wolverines won the national title. And
Dude.
I mean, we could talk about how they beat Ohio State dramatically a few weeks before, but many people I know would be offended by that. So go blue. Happy to see them win.
You went to Ball State. How do you get to claim the Wolverines?
Well, because, around here, come on, B, you grew up in Nebraska. You have to choose a Big Ten school to follow, right? I've got people that grew up in Indianapolis that claim Ohio State just because they live next to it. It's embarrassing to even think.
That's embarrassing.
But he is a fan of the podcast, so he's going to hear that and maybe turn us off. But I more than just man talk about football, right, was a really important story to go with it. Quarterback J.J. McCarthy and his pre-game ritual, which you wrote about, is pretty fascinating and goes against character, goes against type for what we see and usually think of in football players.
Yeah, had you seen his pre-game ritual before? I hadn't followed. I don't follow Michigan, so I didn't never see it.
Quite honestly, I don't follow college football. I just, again, it was no. I had heard about it in previous games. I maybe watched one or two in the season, and I knew that he, his pregame ritual was some solid meditation on the field. But that's all I know about it. I think there was a little bit more involved. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know if there's much more involved, but I'll just kind of speak to that real quickly, because as I work with a lot of guys, and it's really sort of become my focus in my work is working with men to cultivate what I would call a masculine spirituality. And maybe that's a good kind of jumping off point into what the hell is masculine spirituality, as opposed to feminine spirituality. And I do feminine spirituality. Again, I'll explain what that is. But the bottom line is, the game was okay, in my opinion. I mean, I am a college football fan. That's the only sport I really get into. Growing up in Nebraska, the Huskers, right? That's all we really had, and we don't have that much anymore. So I attach myself to just the bowl games and whoever's playing. And I've been a student of the bowl games. And what I saw in this bowl game was two great quarterbacks, one in Michael Penix Jr. of Washington Huskies, and this one, J.J. McCarthy of the Wolverines. And it was a showdown, not of skill, because they're both at mastery level college football QB. They're two of the best in the country. What I saw was a showdown of mind, right? Who could keep it together in the arena, so to speak, at a mind level? And there was no contest. Michael Penix Jr. fell apart for whatever reason. He wasn't sharp. And J.J. McCarthy, although I don't think it was his best game, he was sharp. He was clear. And I just started to think about, like, what's the difference between these two warriors in the arena, if you will? And then I started to think about what J.J. McCarthy did prior to the game. In some ways, I felt like he won the game even before he stepped onto the field. And it's because of that 10-minute meditation that he does every single game.
I think there's a lot to be learned in what you just described, the battle of two men in the arena, because we're all called to battle on a daily basis, whether it's in our work roles, for our families, in our community. And recently I've been taking the men's substance abuse group that I've run successfully for 3 years live here in my area, and I'm converting it to an online situation. And a lot of what I talk about there is men needing to step up and be men, especially when it comes to substance use and abuse. Too often, if we're not meditating, if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not practicing healthy habits, our work, our lives, our family, our community, the pressures and stress of that, much like the pressure and stress of a college bowl game, um, can can take us to the failure point. Like the Mr. Penix Jr. who lost the game. I agree. He couldn't keep it together. It was sad to see. It looked like maybe the pressure was too great for him in that moment. But he was making errant plays, making mistakes that you wouldn't expect of somebody of that caliber. And JJ McCarthy managed the game well. I mean, it was a heavy run game, a lot of running going on by Michigan. But when he was called to make good decisions, he did. And I would agree with you. I think that has a lot to do with preparation. And I feel as though men in general, at least the ones we work with, are struggling with that pre-game preparation. We're not prepared for life all the time.
Was it George Washington who supposedly said, if I had, or maybe it was Abraham Lincoln, I don't know, 5 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 4 hours sharpening my
Sharpening
axe.
axe. Yep.
Right. And I feel like that's sort of the what I saw is a young man who sharpened the axe. And there's a couple different directions I'd love to go. One is, we'll come back to just the courage it takes for a man in a hyper, I would say, toxic masculine, and I participate and I love it, sport like football. I mean, it's on the edge, certainly, of brutality and all kinds of things. And again, I think it has its place, but there is a machismo culture. I played football. I know guys who are in that sort of arena, and there's a locker room vibe to the game, unlike I imagine other sports, maybe volleyball or tennis or whatever. Football is on that edge. It's up there with the MMA and some of the other ones. And so for a guy like that to sit down under the goalpost in a cross-legged position, shut his eyes, be vulnerable, take some deep breaths, while, by the way, millions of people are watching you, that's an act of true courage. I think in some ways more than just getting into the football arena. So I think that's one, thing I would love to explore. And the other is your men's group, talking about meditation. How is meditation received or perceived by those guys, which sound like sort of typical arena-like guys?
Well, I think for the men I come in contact in general, we don't accept it, right? Like, you want me to sit quiet. It takes, I think in my experience clinically, it takes a bit of a sales process to convince men that meditation is a good idea and a healthy thing. As well as I know also taking meditation a step farther and look at its spirituality and look, the research is irrefutable. Meditation, religion, spirituality all help people become healthier and happier.
But even the fact that you and I do this too, you have to say the research says,
Yeah,
right, is already like soft selling.
Yeah.
This ancient thing, this tradition, which by the way is like saying God. It's like there's no such thing. You have your experience, I have mine, beliefs, whatever. It means something different to everybody. Meditation is one of those things. So I think we got to parse out what the hell we mean by meditation.
Sure.
And also, what's the resistance? What's really the resistance? Because I get this from guys all the time. And I find myself saying, well, I do box breathing and it's been proven and used by the Navy SEALs, like to give a seal of approval. So right. What is that? What's going on there?
Well, I think what I was talking about before we hit the record button, we men are not good with our own health. Too much machismo, too much bravado, too much. I can just, I run across this all the time. I can just I can power through it. Whether it's, a back injury or, I just had to have a procedure done yesterday because I was going to power through both of my shoulders being twisted and torn up and not feeling right. But, my doctor 3 weeks ago, she's like, all right, good. We're going to do the procedure. How's tomorrow? I'm like, oh, no. I'm too busy. Let's go 3 weeks. It was stupid. I didn't need to wait 3 weeks. I was just I was not taking care of myself. Right. And so I think there's a history for us men where we say, hey, This is good for you. Go do it. Like, what? No, what I'm doing is just good enough. I can get through the way it is.
And that is absolutely true. And there's a fine line, right? Because you see that within football as an example of just life. You don't have to be interested in football. But the guys who say, "Hey, get rid of this targeting rule." Targeting is when you put your head down and you just ram the guy with the crown of your helmet. Like, let's bring back the grit and the blood and get rid of these, and that's like crossing over to gratuitous violence or gratuitous danger, putting yourself in harm's way. That's very different than the competition of a true rough and tumble sport. And there's a fine line for a guy, right? I find myself doing the same thing. Like, we're taught that I am what I do as a man. I am what I do. Here's a great example of that. Next time you meet a guy in a social situation, notice the first thing you ask him or the second thing you ask him, and he asks you, "Hey, I'm Dan. What's your name?" And then he tells you your name. "I'm Baruch." And then the next question is always, "What do you do? What do you do?" I mean, we've talked about this before. And always it's fill in the blank with how I pay the bills, right? Because not like I'm a husband, I'm a lover, I'm a fighter, I'm a whatever, a poet, I'm an artist. No, I tell you what I do from 9 to 5, how I pay the bills. And so when I go into the doctor, or the thought of going to the doctor is, I can't be doing if I'm doing that. It's taking me away from my doing. And then what am I? What am I if I'm not producing whatever it is I produce? And it starts getting into my worth and my self-worth and net worth. So it's a loaded thing walking into that or considering to make the doctor's appointment.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Going to the doctor takes time, but also it forces us to confront our mortality as well. That was one of the things my doc and I talked about yesterday. What were we talking about? Well, again, my injury was sports related. We were talking about the procedure and many men she had helped and who all had sports related issues that this procedure helped with. And we were talking about, men don't age well. We continue to try to perform like we're 20 or 30 because it makes us feel like, well, I'm not aging. I'm not getting old. I'm not breaking down. We're, I've said this before. I say it all the time. We're all terminal here. We're all going to die. The tragic triad: pain, guilt, and death. And until we accept that and fight it in a more elegant kind of way, we're going to continue to hurt ourselves and be challenged by our mortality and not face it, rather than accept, like, hey, I gotta change the way I do things, or I am going to break myself. And I will. You talk about not being able to produce. When you break yourself in whatever way it is, back, shoulders, knees, whatever, it becomes really hard to produce no matter what you do.
Yeah, and so not facing it, avoidance is a way for us to to try and deal with it. We know we're just delaying or deferring the problem, but I see this with guys who I work with. A lot of guys who are retiring or retired, and all of a sudden they stop doing that thing, and now they have to reimagine who they are, and they're 50, 60, 70 years old. And it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. I'm a one trick pony, right? This is what I do. This is who I am. And then you don't do that anymore. Well, who am I? Well, shit, if I'm not working, if I'm sick, if I'm dealing with cancer, I've thought about this. Do I have disability insurance? How would I feel if I was collecting disability insurance? It would fall on my wife. Who am I? What am I in that situation? That brings up a lot of scary shit.
So I would argue with the idea that it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. It is when you're 70, if you didn't cultivate that habit early on in life. Neurologically speaking, our brains we lose our neuroplasticity as we age. Our brains find it harder to take in new information. So it is factually correct that, by 70, we do struggle to take in new information to make changes unless we practice that earlier in life. And so here's the things we can do as men at 20, 30, 40, 50 is learn, grow, read, connect, do all the things B and I talk about every podcast pretty much, but to be focused on it. And that can come into the realm of sport as well, developing new activities, cultivating new hobbies, growing will prevent that will prevent you from becoming a grumpy old dog that can't learn new tricks at 70.
But that's JJ McCarthy. That's the
Yep.
what I call Wolverine spirituality. It's not either or. It's not I just sit in meditation or I go throw the football. That's what I do. But it's this hybrid, and that's a masculine spirituality. It's not removing yourself from the world, sitting on a mountaintop. He's sitting under a goalpost. He's in the office lobby, so to speak. He's not hiding this, compartmentalizing it, doing it off quiet by himself. And that's why I think it's so powerful, this merger of that being just sitting there, not doing, getting ready for the doing, and it's not either or. And that's what was so powerful and striking to me about this young man doing spirituality.
I sorry, man. I stopped listening after you said Wolverine spirituality.
Which is the first thing I said.
Dude, I got the chills. That is such a badass phrase, right? Wolverine. And look, I also took it another direction in my mind. Not just Michigan Wolverine spirituality. Michigan Wolverine football national champions. For those of you that weren't paying attention,
Which should have been Georgia. For the record, Georgia's a better team.
Okay. So a big, it's funny, today it's cool to be a nerd. Back in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't. I was a big comic book nerd, and the best comic book back then, we all know, was the X-Men, and the best X-Man was Wolverine, right? I'm the best of what I do, and what I do ain't pretty, right? Those claws. And he was a badass, right? Little Canadian fireball, right? He was the coolest X-Man. But also had a deep sense of spirituality, and to be tough, to be the biggest badass, but also to be spiritual, to have that sense of I can sit and meditate and do things that maybe, I don't know, maybe why do we have to qualify that meditation is a manly thing to do? Why do we have to qualify that taking care of yourself, being invested in your health is a manly thing to do? Why do we need to like to have Wolverine spiritual? Why do we need tough spirituality? Why do we have to sell it to ourselves?
Well, dude, you lost me at comic books are cool. So
Saint John Favreau, the savior of the Star Wars franchise, made comic books and Star Wars and X-Men cool.
I was thinking of Red Dawn too. Remember Red Dawn?
Oh, dude,
Patrick Swayze and
yeah,
the Wolverines, right? So,
yeah.
because look, this is my gripe with spirituality. It's been co-opted or hijacked by a feminine brand. It has its place. I practice it. So what do I mean? It's become synonymous with soft, kind of squishy. I go to yoga, and my yoga teacher was talking about doing yummy warrior pose and juicy, right, warrior two, and getting into hydration and using coconut infused ion based water while doing it with this new yoga mat that's $150 and doing it in a safe sacred space and all this stuff. Like, I like that, but I look around and it's me and 9 women, and there's a part of it that is so divorced from its origin story, because yoga was created by Hindu warriors to prepare for battle, to limber themselves not only in body but in mind, so that in battle, when they're defending their homeland, when they're going into war, they could have that J.G. McCarthy clarity of purpose and conviction to stay in the arena when they're scared. So again, I don't want to, throw feminine under the bus, but we do talk about toxic masculinity. I think there's a thing called toxic femininity. And when both of these things go to the extremes, we lose the essence of what, in this case, meditation is.
So then I would question, right, all of these things that have been done for thousands of years are part of ancient wisdom that we know is healthy for us, where did we lose that? Why as men did we lose that? Because I think you and I agree, and I think many of our male listeners have experienced it and see it in our lives, that we've lost masculinity. We seem confused with who we are and where we need to be. It's something you said, right? That focus of purpose has become what I go do from 9 to 5 every day, not who I am, right? That deeper question of who I am. So how do we reclaim that as men? How do we get that Wolverine spirituality?
I don't know how, but let me just share something I read once, and it was informed my understanding of masculine spirituality, and that is the Industrial Revolution was a break from the norms, the rhythms of thousands of years, where a man now would go away from his home, away from his tribe, away from his village, do his work in a compartmentalized 9 to 5 capacity. Up until that point, you were part and parcel. Your kids knew where you were. They could see you doing your thing. You were around your local fellow tribesmen. You were in sync with the agrarian society where, the rhythms of nature are about you and so forth. And then we start compartmentalizing and we start leaving. And this is where I do my work. And this is where I do my religion. And this is where I do my family life. And I think that's part of what we're up against right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. The research and review now continues to villainize the Industrial Revolution for so many things, taking us out of our rhythm, speeding up our rhythm too much as well. I believe it was, I read in Stolen Focus that, since the Industrial Revolution, like life has sped up at such a rate that our bodies can't keep up with it. And we get towards this breaking point. But you're right. So we've lost contact with nature. We've lost contact with each other, with our families. So if we go to a place divorced of our family, of our rituals, like we become disconnected. So how do we reconnect? We still got to work, B,
Yeah.
right? You and I, we all can't be in the cannabis industry or formerly in the cannabis industry for those that listened to last week's podcast, right? Like, how do we reclaim that? How do we help other men reclaim that connectedness, that spirituality?
Well, growing up, you probably, like me, played, on a couple games we like to play as boys. Cops and Robbers was one, and Cowboys and Indians was another. I know it's not politically correct. It's just the
B,
way.
I was busy reading comic books. You forget.
Yeah, we didn't invite those kids to play Cops and Robbers with us. Oh yeah, he's the comic book kid. He'll end up as a logotherapist for sure.
We nerds did have to band together.
So, but Cowboys and Indians, and I think about, like, I love Cowboys, I love Indians. I like watching like Yellowstone or Cowboy John Wayne movies. I think a lot of guys do because it's organic. It's not compartmentalized. He's living his work. Again, there's no compartmentalization, and he doesn't go home and watch on Sundays or Saturdays, college football Sundays, pro football, as other young cowboys live out their dreams, and he's sort of transferring the hero, right, the warrior, onto this young man who's playing out his dreams, and I'm fantasizing about my dreams being played out somehow vicariously. So you ask how. I think we have to take back our power, turn off the tube. Don't My friends who go from college football fanaticism to then Sunday fanaticism, football professional, then to basketball, then to baseball, like there's no time for them to figure out their hero, their warrior. And that's to me a big step, is first figuring out what's my warrior, because it ain't college football. That's ship sailed.
Yeah. So, I mean, and not to denigrate sports too much, because, in logotherapy, even Dr. Frankel says, like, sports competition is a very good thing, whether we were participating or a spectator. It's an opportunity to see human beings at their best, and to, in a way, not to pine for being that again, but to find our way to continue to grow and become our best. But you're right. When we become, those gentlemen among us that become obsessed in moving from season to season, and we're not talking spring, fall, and winter, but from football to hockey to basketball to baseball, rinse and repeat every year, and then focus on the statistical analysis. Like,
And
It's
then
so
play fantasy football with their friends.
hey. We shall not. Many of the men out there, of the 11 other guys that listen, are in my fantasy football leagues. You better back up. And because of that dreaded league, I have a new license plate on my Jeep that is not pretty to see, as the loser of the league. But anyway, yes, fantasy football is, well, just that, fantasy, and it really. Anyway, God, you totally derailed me, bro.
Taking back our
Taking
power
back
from fantasies.
from fantasy, taking back our power, figuring out who we are. I was just talking about this the other day again in that the men's group I run, finding our male role models. First of all, that was actually in a talk on resilience. Having positive male role models as a man helps us to become more resilient. Whether it's John Wayne or the latest Navy SEALs movie or Wolverine, the X-Man from comic books. To find those role models that we can emulate, that we can take bits and pieces of and say, wow, that's a really cool part of life I need to take in. Now, we can't live our life through our role models, but for you and I, we talk about Dr. Peterson a lot. Dude's a great
or
role
Viktor
model.
Frankl.
Viktor Frankl, outstanding role models. When we take bits, we can't live their life, but we can take bits and pieces of their wisdom.
No, but it's not about living their life, and that's the difference. It's about having them as a paradigm shift. That's what Frankl is for me. This is a man who, and this is where, the difference between, I don't know, having The Rock as your, the wrestler, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, versus a Viktor Frankl. Because Viktor Frankl, his war was real, right? He had everything. I've said it before. I'll say it. He had everything taken from him. His wife and his unborn child and his family, his friends, his freedom, and languished in a dark, dreaded concentration camp. And yet, this is a man who was never a victim. As I always say, he was a victor. Viktor Frankl. But he was. He showed me what was possible in the most dreaded of circumstances. And so now I take that paradigm and I go out into my world. I don't just sit there and read the book over and over, which I do. Then I take it out into the world and try and emulate it and live it. And that's where you're getting at with these men. That's what a real mentor is.
Absolutely. I was just talking to another gentleman before we hit the record button about what it means to be a man, a father, and a husband. And I've said this many times. The most important word, I think, in being a husband and father is sacrifice, right? And Dr. Frankl certainly shows that. Men of heroic stature certainly show that. And I think we are called to that. We are called, as we talk about, self-transcendence, to step outside ourselves in service to a cause greater than us, which is often our family, our community, sometimes our work. And we need mentors and role models to do that. But in the end, it's our job to do these things, to do, as this gentleman and I were talking about, to do the things you don't want to do. He was teaching his daughter's new husband, right, who just sometimes doesn't want to change diapers or make the long drive to work. No, that's the stuff you do as a dad and as a husband. You step in and you get your hands dirty. Hopefully it's not too dirty of a diaper, but you get your hands dirty, right? You do the things that are uncomfortable. You get off the couch and you go do the dishes because your wife's had an exhausting day too. Whatever it might be, we are called to sacrifice. And when we don't do those things, we are diminished. We feel like less of a man. And when we turn to things like alcohol and excessive sports watching and Netflix surfing and things like that.
Right. We're outsourcing our power to the drug or to the TV or to the fantasy football, no offense. And again, everything in proportion, like our last week's conversation, nothing moral or immoral about a grain, beer, or football fantasy, whatever. But the point, though, is back to a masculine spirituality. J.J. McCarthy represented it because he did the thing, he did his job, but he did it differently. He understood that that's not who he is, that's what he does. Who he is was underneath that goalpost in those 10 minutes, because after that thing that he's going to do, shelf life is short for guys who do that job. Who is he on the other side of it? And for the guy who's doing dishes, I'm not how I pay the bills. That's something I do. But I also am the guy who does dishes and does dirty diapers and does the lawn and does vulnerability and does lovemaking and all of these things. And so that to me is meditation. It's standing in all of our things and understanding this is my arena, whatever it is I'm facing.
Well, and like you said, what is under what we do is our spirituality. We are all spiritual beings, right? We have our nuos, our defiant human spirit, that part of us that makes us who we are. And when we take care of that through meditation, through sometimes a form of formalized religion, through being in nature and meditating upon what we don't understand and what's greater than us, we become more than just what we do from 9 to 5 or 8 to 10, whatever it might be. But for some reason, we continue, some men, many men, continue to fear that and avoid it and just focus on the shallow depths of watching sports, going to work, and doing all these things. So maybe there's a challenge to be issued here, men. Maybe we need to seek out our true selves. You know, B and I talked about it before. Not this new year, new you BS, but new year, true you. Who are you underneath what you do from 9 to 5? How do you go about finding that?
And can you cultivate a practical, real, masculine spirituality? Maybe we'll end with a couple, I don't know, tools. I'll start and give you time to think about it. One of the things, I have a tool shed now online that I give to my men that I'm working with. And one of the tools in there is called mountain pose. And if you've ever done yoga, it seems like a simple, almost, check the box, get it out of the way pose. And all you do is you stand on your mat, literally just stand there. But it's a warrior pose because you're supposed to stand on the mat in life when your wife is yelling at you, or when your employee is, not doing their job, or when your boss is castigating you, or when the person cuts you off in traffic. Can you stand there and not, as our good doctor says, not react?
Mm-hmm.
Can you take a deep breath? Can you, instead of reacting, can you become a mountain, right? Not subject to your circumstances, but to respond to those circumstances, as JJ McCarthy under the goalpost. And that's a warrior stance. That's mountain pose. That's a masculine spirituality. You don't have to go to a yoga studio. You don't have to buy any, trinkets for your office, crystals and incense. I got them, but you don't need them, right? Just stand on your mat. That's, to me, Wolverine spirituality.
I love that idea because I have to talk to many men about not reacting. Look, we become angry because that's one of the main emotions we're allowed to express, but and then we react. And too often, when we just practice a little meditation, some deep breathing, mountain pose, we realize we don't have to react to these situations. We don't have to react to our partner, our wife's difficult day, or the kids being frustrating, or work, or things like that. So that's a great idea, B. For me, let's see, I recommend one way to get back the true you and to embrace that spirituality, get out into nature. My workouts this year have been diminished because, as I told you, I broke myself and can't really hit the weights. So I've been walking, a lot of walking, serious walking. And in the great north central Indiana, you cannot walk outside. It is cold, it is snowy, it's slippery, it's nasty. So I hit the treadmill often, and it's terrible. Excuse me. Hate the treadmill. It's a necessary evil, whether it's an hour of incline or whatever, and, maybe Netflix or an audio book. It's inorganic, but I get the workout in. What I truly love is getting out into nature. There's some state parks near here. The trails are gorgeous. You get some hills, you breathe fresh air, even if it's cold air. But there's also a deep sense of connectedness with nature, the world, and it's an opportunity to think too. I'm not just stepping in some hamster wheel, but I'm out in nature. And men, I tell you, getting out there, whether it's walking or hiking or fishing or hunting, whatever it might be, it's good for you.
Yeah, that's back to no longer living compartmentalized, divorced from our surroundings,
Mm-hmm.
divorced from, the rhythms of of nature, of the world. And so I think that's a part of what we're talking about for men, because I see it all the time. Getting out of compartmentalization of, here's who I am at work, and here's who I am at home, and here's who I am as a dad, and here's who I am as a son, and getting back to this holistic lifestyle, and that's nature just has its magical way of bringing us back to that. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And that's definitely, finding the true you. Now, I think that meditation's amazing. Being in nature is amazing. What's even more amazing, our third tip, men, get after this. Come join your search for meaning, right? This is a way to find the true you. This is a way we're going to talk all about spirituality. We're going to talk the stuff we have planned for your search for meaning. You get to be in a community with B and I. You get to chat, and our amazing and beautiful co-host, Dr. Elise Cortez. She definitely is the beauty in between these two beasts. You get all that logotherapeutic goodness, a community, a curriculum. This curriculum is outstanding. What B has put together, what we're working on creating, a learning library full of, oh my goodness, so much logotherapy, your head will swim.
Well, more than just a shameless plug, that's also a component of male spirituality. Men must do this work in conjunction with other people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we are solo hunters out on the battlefield or out in the woods hunting. We have to be in community to
Mm-hmm.
open up, to learn how to be vulnerable, like JJ McCarthy, sitting there vulnerably in the midst of 30 million of his community members, right? We're not asking men by the way, this isn't just for men. Your search for meaning is for anybody, but we're not asking you to expose yourself. We're giving invitations to learn how to open up, because that is what transforms that second half of life when you can no longer be in the football arena.
Absolutely. And B, I tell you, one of the saddest things I've been seeing lately, the past couple of years, is men out of community, men without friendships, deep friendships, meaningful relationships, to have these conversations, to engage in these kinds of topics, to ask questions like, dude, do you change diapers? Do you meditate? Right? All those difficult questions we scratch our heads about, like, is it manly to do this stuff? We are missing that community. And so what we want to do in your search for meaning is give you a place to develop that community in a logotherapeutic, in a meaningful sense. We want you there. So take a
Amen.
look at themeaningacademy.com to find out more, or you can find out B and I and Dr. Elise's individual websites are all at themeaningacademy.com. What else, B?
Until the next time, live with meaning, purpose, and resilience. Thanks, my friend.
Always a pleasure. Take care, everybody.